Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Nordvik. This is episode 4 and in this episode we are starting to work on the downtown of Nordvik. Now if you don't know, this entire region is called Nordvik, but the main city, or perhaps the only place that might be categorized as a city, is also called Nordvik. Now it's been a while since episode 3, and once you see how long this episode is, I think you might figure out why. When I imported all the footage from the time-lapse into the Premiere Pro, which I use to edit my videos, I had 13 hours of footage. Yeah, 13 hours, which I then, I cut down a little bit and sped it up quite a lot, but yeah, still 13 hours. So it's gonna be a long one. Take your time to watch this. You might have to split it up between different kinds of days, so you might see the first part of this video one day and you have to go to bed to watch the other one. To make this viewing experience a little bit easier, as I always do, I split up the video into different chapters. At least I think they're called chapters. And they're based on what I'm doing on screen. The first thing that we're gonna do in this episode is work a little bit on the grid layout and talk a little bit about the city itself and what I envisioned when I started working on this. And then we're gonna work on something probably like the main thing in this episode, and that is the main shopping street. It's a good one. I really enjoyed it. And after that we're gonna work on the main shopping center here in Nordvik, as well as a cultural center of some sort. I'm not really quite sure what it is, but yeah, there might be a library in there. There might be concerts and etc. And of course the city hall and police station. And then we are working on a old harbor which has gone through a little bit of gentrification and is now quite a popular restaurant spot. And after that we are continuing working on some urban neighborhoods, as well as a very old and historical church. And the last thing that we're gonna do is work on the main train station in the city. So yeah, it should be a really good one. Before we begin, there is some information that I need to hand out whilst you're all here. I am planning to implement a sort of a Q&A section into every single episode forward. So I'm actually gonna pin a comment down below where I ask you to basically post your questions if you got any. And it could be about anything. It could be about the series. This could be about it could be questions about me and my favorite cities and where I've been, where I lived. It could be about some topics that you are particularly interested in, as long as it's somewhat relevant to City Skylines and this series and me really, then I'm all for it. So use the comment section and I'll include some comments, some questions, and of course my answers in some upcoming videos. I do sort of already implemented a Q&A section into this video. However, it's more based on the pinned comment in episode 3, which is more about me asking you what kind of things you want me to build in Nordvik going forward. So I also got a chapter completely dedicated to responding to that pinned comment. But with that out of the way, I think it's time to properly start the episode. And we are starting off with some work on the foundation and the layout of this area. Alright, so in the beginning of this video I did zoom in on the place that we were going to build at, or at least I thought I was going to build there. I didn't, however, but this is just right next to it, so it's very close, very nearby. It's roughly right in the middle of this entire map. The first thing I did when I figured out where I wanted to have this city center located, I went over and used the terraform tools. I don't know what they're called, but yeah, basically I flattened the entire area. It would make sense that a city center or any kind of center of a settlement would be on somewhere reasonably flat. So I had that in mind when I started building. And then I also went ahead and started on the layout of the city, the road layout. And this is just a rough estimate. This is I'll change a little bit, but most of it are where it's supposed to be. It's not that difficult to, you know, figure out where the roads are going to be, because this is a rather small downtown area. And I did have roughly a good idea of what I wanted and where I wanted it. You can also see that I used grids, and some might think that our grid layout, you know, or just grids in a city, that's purely an American thing. It's not. I think that is probably one of the biggest misconceptions made by City Skylines players. I hear it all the time. Like, in European cities, they're organic, they're free flowing, there's no grids, etc., etc. And in the US, it's just grids, and that's just wrong. That's just wrong. I feel like I want to make a rant video where I talk about how wrong that is, because making a city, or making a city out of a grid, has been like the go-to method for thousands of years. Just look at the Greeks, the ones that probably were the first to actually sit down and say, alright, let's actually try to plan out this city. And what did they use? They used grids. It's now, how did the Romans build their cities when they built, like, you know, cities out in their, like, outskirts of their empire? You know, they were first. They were just basically military camps that they eventually evolved into cities. But even then, they had, like, it was grids. They had two main roads, and they intersected in the middle, and at the middle they had like a town square, and they used grids. I just can't get over it. But yeah, I'm using grids here in Nordvik. So yeah, I have a lot to rant about, definitely, when it comes to that topic. It's something that I get quite annoyed about quite often, actually, as well. So but I'll try to calm down here now and talk a little bit about what I'm doing on screen. I do, of course, have the main road going right through the city here. This is the main road that I built in episode 1, actually, I believe. And alongside that main road, you know, there's going to be a lot of traffic on the road, so I thought that it would be very realistic to have a gas station, at least one. I'm also considering putting one on the other side of the road as well, once I start working on it, not in this episode. And I also placed down a McDonald's with a custom drive-through, because this would be an area where a lot of cars would be, and I also had a huge parking lot, so people from, you know, nearby settlements, smaller settlements, when they are, for example, driving here on a Saturday, wanted to spend the day in the city, maybe go to a restaurant, do a little bit of shopping, they drive, because usually public transport isn't that great in more rural areas. So just drive, find a good parking spot in the huge parking lot, they can head on to the petrol station, fill up their vehicle with fuel, and maybe just head on over to the drive-thru as well. And I also feel like this thing, huge parking lots, drive-thrus, a lot of people might think that's purely an American thing. It's not. It's very much not. It's you can find stuff like this all over Europe and probably also all over the world. Definitely in areas where cars are being used quite a lot, and in more rural areas in Scandinavia, definitely every family has at least 1 or 2, maybe 3 vehicles. Now we are working on something that I knew immediately when even I started this series, that this is something that I need to have, and that is a shopping street completely car free, or somewhat car free. This is something that you usually find in almost any city of a certain size, whether that is in Scandinavia or the rest of Europe, really. It's very common. You do get traffic here every now and then, but that is mostly service vehicles and trucks that are delivering goods to these stores. Other than that, it is completely just for pedestrians. And I chose this cobblestone road to I don't know, make it a little bit more historical, maybe make it a little bit more people friendly in a way. I did draw inspiration from a lot of different places when it came to building this street in particular. You can also see that I am using a lot of different kinds of buildings. Of course, I do want a lot of wooden buildings, because that would be very nice. These wooden buildings will probably be one of the oldest buildings here, but I'm mixing it up and using a lot of newer buildings as well, because I feel like Nordvik is constantly changing, and I feel like it wasn't too long ago that Nordvik was really even categorized as a city. So as it grew, it also needed newer buildings, bigger buildings. Maybe they tore down some older ones, and maybe they just kept some older ones. So what I went for is try to just get a lot of buildings from different kinds of periods, really. Some buildings that might have been built in the 40s or 50s, maybe even earlier, and then some buildings perhaps built in the 70s or 80s. That was a period when financially, at least Norway, and really the rest of Scandinavia as well, did prosper to some extent. And also some quite modern buildings, maybe built in the last 20 years. The building that I placed on the edge or on the corner is one of those buildings that probably popped up quite recently. But I wanted to have a nice mix of modern and older buildings to try to build up that storyline that this is a city that is expanding, and for maybe 100 years ago it wasn't more than just a small village, and now it's actually quite a big city as well. Another thing that I do is putting buildings, most likely commercial buildings, and using movie to drag them into other buildings, if that makes any sense. And that is to sort of reinstate how all of this is mixed zoning. These aren't just commercial buildings. These are shops in the first story, and then maybe in the second or third story you'll have offices, and perhaps the ones above that again are apartments. that is a thing that I really want City Skylines 2 to have, if they ever get around to building or making that game. I really hope that they include some sort of mixed zoning, because it's very rarely you'll find buildings that are just offices or just commercial buildings. Maybe in like some retail parks they are just one thing, but usually if you're going to a city of some sort, definitely like huge skyscrapers, like they aren't just offices, you know, they are all three. They are offices, they are commercial buildings, they are apartments, it's all of them. So I'm quite fascinated how they didn't include mixed use or mixed zoning into this game already, but it might have been just a lot easier to split them up like they did. But hopefully, if they ever get around to make a sequel, I hope they include that as well. I thought that I could start with the comments that I got in the last video to sort of try out this Q&A thing even before it started. I got a comment here from someone who's Russian. I went through it with Translate, I think, and I think it is Mikhail, or the Russian version of Michael probably, but Mikhail, I think that's how you pronounce it. First up with some very kind words, thank you very much. And then something he's curious about. It is, what about public transportation in these kind of rural areas? We really like to see some old buses going back and forth from the big city to the tiny ones. Yeah, I first of all, I have already answered this question in the comments on that video, but in case you missed it, public transportation is gonna be a thing here. However, it's not gonna be a big thing. There's gonna be buses in the city and this, like, the city area of Nordvik, like buses that usually that go quite frequently, and also some long distance buses that are exactly the thing that you are talking about, the buses that usually go from the city center to smaller areas. They will be going once I actually built up Nordvik, the city, and other small towns. I would place down some smaller buses that don't go so often, and there's not that many of them, but there's definitely gonna be some. But there will be buses on the countryside as well, but there will be school buses, because school buses they usually go wherever people live. And that's not just in the city, that's also somewhere quite rural. So once I get around to building some bus depots and actually getting around to find some buses that I would like to function as school buses, then I'll get around to show them on screen as well. But yeah, that's definitely something I want to incorporate. Another thing is, he's not sure if hunting is allowed in Norway, but at least listening a story about this would be interesting. So yeah, hunting is definitely legal. It is quite a big thing in rural parts of Norway. I'm also very sure that it is quite a big thing in rural parts of Sweden and Finland as well. You have different kinds of hunting seasons, where you have 2 weeks where you're allowed to hunt, for example, deer, and then you got like a month where you're allowed to hunt moose, for example. I don't know the exact amount, like how long you have, but there are like very strict rules when it comes to hunting, and you can't just buy yourself a gun and just head on to the woods. First of all, you have to pass a test. I think it's both a theoretical test and a practical test to see if you actually can hunt, really. And you also have to be a part of a it's almost like a guild, like the Hunters Guild. And these groups, they are usually divided into like geographical areas, and in order to be even allowed to hunt, you need to be a part of that group. And then this group or guild, whatever you should call them, they are given a certain amount of allowed kills, if that's a thing. So they're allowed to, for example, shoot 4 deers or 7 or 8 deers, and they can shoot less than that, but they cannot shoot more than that. It is quite a hefty fee if you break any of these rules, and you can also go to jail. So it's very strict, and it's a lot of it's a lot of rules, and it definitely should be. And when I read the question here, I immediately sort of figured out that I actually was missing something, and that is one of these. I probably like to call them hunting towers. That is directly translated from Norwegian, at least. And these are these small wooden towers. You could probably just call them lookout towers, really. And they're usually placed down in open areas. Just for example, you can see on screen right here, I'll place something down from what we built in episode 3. And it is an open area, it's a field. So it would be quite easy to spot out a deer or a moose going across this field here from the lookout tower. You don't find this anywhere urban. You have to go out in the countryside, and it's a small thing that makes this area look a little bit more realistic. So thank you for reminding me, really. The last thing was about electric cars and how there's a lot of them, really. And he was asking if it was any electric stations or something like that anywhere in Nordvik. And I'm definitely gonna place down something like that. I am not sure if there's too much to choose from on the workshop, but usually any kind of gas station sort of have that incorporated with them, that they have some sort of station in the back for charging up your electric car. But most of the time, really, they just charge at home. So there's not that many gas stations that also include these outlets. It's very common to just charge your electric vehicle at home. So thank you, Mikael, for your comment. Let's head on over to something else, shall we? Let's see another comment here. God of Hellfire, probably one of the OGs in this on this channel. He's been around for a while. He commented this and basically asked to have a grungy club down an alleyway where all metalheads go to chain smoke cigarettes and headbang to a Children of Bodom cover band. Honestly, I have no idea, or I don't listen to heavy metal. It's not the kind of music I would listen to, really. But heavy metal is quite big in Norway and quite big in Finland as well. Probably bigger in Finland, really. I remember in Eurovision one year, probably 15 years ago now, Finland sent a band called, I think they were called Lordi, and they had this heavy metal song, and it completely shocked everyone. I remember it was just because Eurovision is you don't think about heavy metal when you hear about Eurovision. So when they came around and actually won the damn thing, it was quite cool. I remember that, but I don't think I heard any other type of heavy metal song since then. So that's really more about me than the genre itself. But I really like your comment, and stick around to the end. I have a surprise. I did include a grungy club down an alleyway to be a sort of like a meetup spot for those who would like to headbang and chain smoke cigarettes, because I'm pretty sure there's people in Nordvik who would very much enjoy that. So thank you for a comment. And the next one is Jerome, who is very kind. I do like to hear that what I am creating here in Nordvik sort of reminds you of trips you might have taken yourself years ago. So thank you so much. He came up with a lot of different options that I could include in Nordvik. The first was an iconic bridge. There are several iconic bridges, not just in Norway, but in Sweden as well, definitely. I do have a somewhat of an iconic bridge already here, right next to downtown. I remember calling it my mini version of the Atlantic Road once I built it in episode 1. I will build it up more when the time comes, because I need to change it up a little bit, because no ferries or ships can get underneath it. It's not tall enough, so I need to change it up a little bit, and perhaps I'll make it a little bit more iconic when I do it. Get a little bit more detail in, but I don't plan to do any more bridges like that really. But the comment that I really, or the option that I really got fixated on, was the open pit mine, to either be still operational or being abandoned and rebuilt as a tourist attraction. And I am gonna build that in a future video. And I read that comment before I started working on this episode, and of course I totally realized that yes, that's something I need to do. And in order to create sort of a storyline to it, you can see me later on in this video creating a brickworks. So the idea is that later on I'll make a mine, and that mine that I'm gonna build later on, it would extract clay, and then the clay would be shipped to this brickworks here in the city of Nordvik. So it sort of all hangs together, it sort of all makes sense. But you're gonna see that in a future video, and that mine should be also abandoned by now, since the brickworks is now gone through gentrification and is now more of a spot for restaurants and offices than actually a place where you produce bricks. Now to summarize a little bit of what we've been doing on screen, I have continued to working on the main shopping strip. I also added in some market props to make it seem like there's somewhat of a farmer's market going on. And I also went ahead and placed down a invisible pedestrian path right in the middle of the road. So instead of having just people walking on the side, walking on the sidewalk, we actually have people walking right in the middle of the street, which was what I wanted. And I also placed down these event spawners, you could probably call them, to sort of create this feel that people are actually stopping to take a look at the farmers market instead of just walking straight through. They're actually stopping because they think there is a event going on, but actually there isn't. But you'll see in the cinematics at the end here that they actually do stop, and you have a ton of movement in this area, which I really love. Next up, we wanted to work a little bit on some newer development here in the city. I decided to go for a pretty big shopping mall because that is once again very much realistic. This shopping mall is from Finland, I believe. You can just find it on the workshop. I think it's actually called the Bpop Mall or Bpop Center or something. It's a really fun name, and I felt I needed to place it down since it was finished, and it's roughly the same size that I was looking for when it came to a big shopping mall. And since it was finished as well, I definitely needed to place it down somewhere. And right next to it, I placed down a sort of a community center or civic center or whatever you should call it. So this part of downtown is slightly newer. There might have been some older buildings here that weren't particularly nice, perhaps, that was tore down in order to make way for these newer buildings right here, because I think the mall and the civic center are both fairly new, probably anything between 10-20 years old. So yeah, considering the oldest building in the shopping street that we just built, these things are fairly new. And I also decided to build this small custom bus stop. This would probably be more like an end station for the buses. So as I already talked about, the buses that go long distance, they will probably stop here instead of by the road somewhere. So you have actually a more built up area for them to stop at. And I decided to go a little bit on the detailing end and detail up this area a little bit more to make it, a little bit nicer. And then I started working on the city hall / police station. I decided why not just get both of them at the same time. The first asset that I placed down was in fact a city hall. I think it is Canadian, but don't quote me on that, but I think it is based on a city hall in Canada. But I liked the size and also liked the colors really, and it looks like a city hall that could have been built in maybe the 80s or early 90s. It's got that sort of feel to it, and I decided to use I'm pretty sure it's American police station, and I used Move It to just put it into the city hall, so that you have the front end of this building works as the entrance for the city hall, but once you go in the back, that's the entrance for the police station. And I've also gone ahead and downloaded a few packs filled with different kinds of signs and logos and stuff. And you could see me place down 2 police signs, and one is in Norwegian and the other one that was placed, I think the larger one was Swedish. And that sort of doesn't make sense, because why would there be a police station for 2 different nations in one? But that is just to add a little bit more to the storyline that Nordvik isn't placed in one country, and it's quite difficult to figure out what country it might be placed in. Definitely if you are in the city somewhere, as you can see, there are different kinds of signs, and you look at the police sign on one end and you see, oh, that's the Norwegian police, but then you go ahead and you watch on the other side and that's the Swedish police. So it's there to sort of build up the storyline, as I said, that this isn't set in one particular country. This is set in all of the Scandinavian countries, really. So let's move forward a little bit. The next thing we're going to work on is the brickworks that I sort of mentioned just a few minutes ago. I went out to the workshop and I found some very nice looking assets. I think they're straight from Stockholm, if I'm not completely mistaken. And I'm not sure if they are nearby each other in Stockholm, if they are centered around each other, or if they're scattered around and it's just a random selection of buildings. But either way, I wanted to incorporate them and I wanted to get sort of a storyline going with these, and that's what I got the idea from. I think it was Jerome that came up with the idea of the pit mine, and then I sort of took that idea and went a little bit further with it, and thought that there could be a clay mine nearby, and the clay that is being extracted from that mine most likely boarded a ship, and then the ship came here into Nordvik and into this brickworks that is by the harbor here. So it's a very old brickworks, a very historical one as well. But you're gonna see me later that I am gonna place down a lot of restaurant assets and props to make it feel like this is no longer in use as a brickwork, but it's been turned around into a nice restaurant area with restaurants in the first floor, and then maybe some offices and perhaps even apartments above that again. I also started working on this neighborhood really close to the brickworks, and I thought this could be a neighborhood where historically all the workers that used to work at the brickworks, they lived in this neighborhood. So that is why most of these buildings here are brick buildings. They're not wooden in any way, because there was a brickworks right next to this area, so why wouldn't they just use what they produced in that factory? And I wanted to sort of make the road layout sort of a mess, and the same with the buildings. I sort of spliced them really close together, because I wanted this area to sort of grow quite organically as more and more people needed housing. This would be historically a very poor neighborhood. You know, there would just be the workers here, and they wouldn't make that much money in the factory. So the houses as well they lived in, they would be in quite a poor standard. But as time passed, this area might have also gone through a little bit of gentrification. The insides of these houses have modernized, and I think this is actually a pretty cool little area that we have right now. And another storyline that I came up with as I was building this is that the neighborhood right here was a lot larger in the past, and it did actually it wasn't only in this small area, it was also in the area that is now occupied by the shopping mall and the community center. But the neighborhood in that spot was actually torn down, probably even earlier than the building of the community center and the shopping mall, and it was replaced by buildings in perhaps the 60s or 70s or 80s that was then again demolished to make way for the bigger and more modern shopping mall and community center. I also used some letters that I downloaded from the workshop to turn one of the brickworks building into a theater. So if you don't speak Norwegian, Swedish, or maybe even Danish, you wouldn't understand that, but the name that I spelled out there was the Brickworks Theater. Because you do see that quite often, that old factories of some sort, they quite often gets turned into these kind of cool cultural places. Like this one, it's gonna turn into a theater and also a restaurant spot. But in real life as well, you see it quite often. For example, in Trondheim in Norway, there is a old ship wharf that is now turned into a very popular restaurant spot and a shopping mall. The outside of the ship wharf is still the same, and you also have these areas where, I don't know what to call them, but the areas where the ship would be in once it was, I don't know, being repaired or whatever. And these things are still intact, but they might be turned into a fountain area, or even during the winter time, a skating rink. And I think that's a way cooler thing and a way better thing than to just demolish everything and build up something new. Just take what you have and build from that again, because it adds some history to it. It adds something more unique, and this is getting more and more common as time goes by, really. But as you can see, I am using mostly props in order to create these restaurants. There are no people using these chairs, for example, that I'm placing down. I do have downloaded some props of people sitting down, which I'll later use to make it sort of feel like this place is actually used. But in order to make people walk in this area, I did, however, place down these commercial blocks that I used Move It to place inside the Brickworks factory. And these blocks are just, they're a size of one tile, for example. They're very small. Or actually, I don't think they're called tile. I think you just call a square, perhaps. I don't know. They're tiny at least. And they function as, for example, a commercial building in this game. So you do get people walking along this road wanting to use the commercial buildings that are in place. And that is what makes people come down here. That is what makes all of the foot traffic possible. And really what is bringing not just this area, but also the entire Nordvik, the city of Nordvik so far. It is what brings it more life and more people walking around. So I think these block services or block buildings are almost essential in actually most save games where you're trying to make things a little bit more realistic. Now the last thing I'm doing right outside the brickworks here is first of all placing down some nice decals, also using some very nice keys by I do believe Avanya, and people don't walk on these keys, so I'm trying to make it a little bit more lively really by placing down some benches and some planters and some trees on top of these to create a little bit more greenery in this area. And then I'm going around and placing down these sitting people props, whatever you should call them, to make it look like there's actually people here enjoying this brickworks harbor that I have officially called it. And you're gonna see me later now make a custom sign using PO, or definitely trying to use PO. I'm pretty new to all of it, so it's a new thing even for me, but I think it's gonna work out pretty fine. But what I did first, I downloaded some more of these, I don't know what they're supposed to be called, letter packs or whatever. These look like no, I don't know what they're called. I think they're designed to be used with PO. That's why they are very generic really, because you could do whatever you want with them with PO. Change the color, change the angle, change the size and everything. So I first of all spelled out the name, and in Norwegian it is called Tegelverkshavna, which is then directly translated as the Brickworks Harbor or the Brickyard Harbor. Basically it's an old brickworks that is also a harbor. But now it's neither. It's just a nice cool area, but the name still stands, and and I wanted this area to be quite iconic, so it needed a huge sign that you can easily spot. And what's really cool about this as well, as when you're driving across the bridge, you're driving on the main road across the bridge, this is the first thing you see. This is the first thing you see of Nordvik. It is this Brickworks harbor, and it's a somewhat iconic sign as well. Now this time lapse is of course sped up, and I also did cut a lot out, but I was really struggling with the PO. It's not hard work, but I think I made it a lot more tedious than it needed to be. I don't know if there's a simpler way to do this, but I needed to turn every single letter, basically going from lying down to standing up, and I thought I could do all of them at once, but maybe you can, but I couldn't figure it out, so I went ahead and made sure that each and every one of these letters individually stood up instead of lying down. And once I was done with that, I just copied everyone and moved it on top of one of the probably the main building in this brickworks. I also had to make the letters a little bit smaller so they fit, and of course trying to make sure that all of these letters were looking nice and they had like the same distance between each other. It's tedious, and once again I don't know if it is or if it could be done a lot simpler, but I'm just trying to become more of an expert in PO than what I used to be, because I'm quite brand new. Now, as I just finished up the brickworks, I thought I could continue with the quest on becoming a lot better in PO than what I used to. So I decided to maybe go a little bit overboard with good intentions and create sort of a custom, not really a custom building, but detailing it with just PO. So I placed down quite a generic office building, and then I had a pack filled with Swedish signs. One of them was Swedbank, and then I took a billboard and used PO to make it larger, and turning that into sort of the background for the logo. And then I also went ahead and used these wooden pillars, if you might call them that was being used in the billboard that I just PO'd. I sort of turned that to a part of this building, because you can see that this generic office building already had these lines. So instead of just being these simple lines, I decided to once again using PO to just make it stand out a little bit, make it look a little bit different. I've also said that I want to have more wooden buildings in this series because that's very realistic. And when there is not enough on the workshop, I decided to maybe just make it myself. So of course not the entire building is not wooden, but I think it helps, and it really makes it a little bit more unique by having these wooden pillars a part of this building. And I also placed a small sushi shop on the corner. I think this building could be also very much mixed development. So you would find perhaps apartments on top. You'll find, of course, the sushi restaurant by the ground floor, and then you probably also have some offices further up, or perhaps there's just shops and offices and no apartments. But I guess we can just let our imaginations run free here. And I also wanted to add somewhat of a loading bay in the back of the shopping mall, place down some loading bay props by Beard Monkey, and also a truck and some crates and even some people, just to add that little bit of detail in maybe an area that you wouldn't expect to find some detail. And I think that is one of the reasons why I enjoy detailing, is to focus on these areas that wouldn't necessarily stand out, but once you actually go a little bit deeper and you find these areas, it really makes everything look a lot more natural and a lot more alive. Now I am moving on, and I wanted to work on this area by the shore. And the first thing I thought I could at least try to do is try to replicate the very much famous harbor in Bergen. And when I say replicate, I really mean draw inspiration from. And yeah, I drew a lot of inspiration from that harbor, but also some inspiration from the also very famous buildings along the river in Trondheim. However, I am going to revisit this area in the next episode because I wasn't quite happy. In the next episode I will be working on this little cove, whatever this is, this area. I will be working on what is the opposite side of this. Yeah, I'm gonna call it a cove, but so the opposite of the city center here. I'm not gonna spoil anything, but yeah, it's gonna be pretty decent, I hope. But however, I did come back and changed up this area as well, so I did cut a lot of the building of this harbor out of the time lapse, simply because very little of it will stay the way it is. But the neighborhoods that I'm working on right now, they are gonna stay roughly the same. Actually, they are gonna stay 100% the same. Once again, trying to mix up these types of buildings, because I don't have one certain type of building in this series. There just isn't enough in one certain pack, so I am trying my best to use different kinds of styles and trying to make it work. It's quite difficult, you know, so it's gonna be if you're gonna be real picky about it, you might say, well, you know, why is there a building that is usually found in, I don't know, Chicago, why is it standing right now next to a building that can usually be found in Germany? But that's just how it is. That's just what I have to play around with. I don't really have any other choice. I could try to make assets myself, but I don't want to. I just don't want to. I don't feel like it. I don't want to spend time learning to use Blender or any other type of software. I don't think I would. I actually tried it, but I didn't enjoy it at all. I didn't find it a good use of my time, so I'm trying my best here, and it is sort of a challenge, and it is quite a fun challenge as well. Definitely when you finish up with an area and you actually see that it sort of works, that's a good feeling. But sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, and I think it sort of works in this area. So now we are working on the church here in Nordvik, probably one of the oldest in the region, and quite possibly one of the largest one as well. This one is made by Ironwind. I'm not completely sure, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Ironwind. You can find that person's stuff on the workshop. It is something that I mean that everyone should just take a look at. That person has made some incredible assets, and Most of the assets are from real life places in Finland, so I have gone ahead and subscribed to a lot of different stuff made by Einwind, and this church is one of them. What I like about this church is first of all the texturing. It is top work, but I also like the size of it. I think it fits quite perfectly in a city like Nordvik. This city isn't a capital-sized city. You can see that the downtown here is quite small. There are of course gonna be more buildings around this area. This isn't gonna be just a city. This is just a downtown, but still, I feel like this size of a church is quite right and quite fitting. And what I also like is I do believe that the church is the tallest building in Nordvik, when you're considering the is it called a spear? I think it's called a spear. Definitely the tallest part of the church. I remember I was I think I was vacationing in Bosnia a few years ago, and I was at the we had this tour by this tour guide, and we were walking past one of the churches in I think this was in Mostar in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the tour guide said something about how the tallest building in a country or in a city tells you what the people living there find the most important. So definitely in the past, the churches, they were the tallest. All kinds of religious buildings were the tallest because that was most important for them. However, these days it's mostly banks, and skyscrapers are often headquarters for banks and different sort of financial institutions. So that means that these days money is more important than anything else. I know that's just something probably he just says, but I quite like the anomaly that he came up with. It does actually quite fit, and I definitely know what he meant about it. But if you're following what he said, it looks like historically speaking, religion is very important for the people in Nordvik here as well. I also worked on creating a pathway around the church. This is probably still gonna be a part of the graveyard, but it is open for everyone, and it most likely is used as a shortcut by a lot, and maybe it's also used by a lot of people when they just want to go and hang out by the waterfront, because this is a very nice area. And I could have actually just filled up this entire area with tombstones, because this is quite an old church. It's an old graveyard. It would make sense, wouldn't it, that there would be a lot of tombs around here. However, I thought that perhaps this is so old now and so historical that people don't get buried here anymore. What you usually find in larger cities is that they have these gigantic graveyards somewhere on the outskirts of the city. And when I mean gigantic, I mean gigantic, I mean huge. However, maybe just a few decades ago, they thought that in order to keep this area around the church quite open and green and friendly for people to use, maybe they want to go camping, and not camping, but picnic probably around the waterfront. So in order to make that a reality for a lot of people, they probably just said that no more burials around this down this church. But I still think that this church here in Nordvik is very much open for weddings, confirmations. Confirmations is quite a huge thing in the this type of church that is mostly found in Scandinavia, which is a part of the Protestant part of Christianity. And you can also divide Protestantism into smaller parts, if you might call it that. And then it is Lutheranism that is the main thing in all the Nordic countries. And in the Lutheran Church, confirmation is what you go through when you are, I think, 15 years old, and it's supposed to be a rite of passage from being a kid to an adult. But in reality, it's just you get a lot of money when you turn 15. That's just how it is, definitely these days. And now I'm working on this custom intersection that I placed down for some reason. I did want to focus a little bit on the traffic aspect in this part. Right now there's not a lot of traffic in this area. Definitely not going from the main road onto the bridge that goes across the cove. And that is because there's simply nothing on the other side of it. But once I am done, and once I've built up Nordvik a little bit more, there's gonna be stuff on the other side as well. For example, it's gonna be a huge harbor. Actually gonna be multiple harbors. There's gonna be a harbor for ferries to get across to some islands further away from Nordvik. So there's going to be a lot of passengers from there. There's also going to be a industrial harbor that's going to sort of be like the main way that Nordvik is going to get different kinds of cargo. That means there's going to be a lot of traffic from the main road across the bridge. So I thought, instead of just having them drive through a roundabout, for example, or just a normal intersection with traffic lights, I thought, however, we could try to do something a little bit different. So I sort of just took this really on the go and tried to create sort of a very small custom intersection. There are no traffic lights here. Actually, there's gonna be a traffic light, but the main aspect of it is that it's gonna be a lot of free flowing of traffic. There's a lot of lanes going all over the place, but there's gonna be a proper use of signs as well. But I need to come back and just see if it works once we're actually built up enough on the other side of the bridge, so that we actually can get some traffic in here and see if it does work. And after that, I started working on this bike path that I wanted to have basically going all over the place really. The idea behind this bike path is that it goes from downtown of Nordvik and all the way to the college or university or major high school. That's going to be a little bit further out. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to call it, but it's going to be some sort of small university a little bit further away. So it would make sense that, since there's going to be young people attending the university, they're most likely not going to own a car, so it would be fitting to just focus on some bicycle infrastructure as well. For example, in Denmark, cycling is pretty huge. I've been to Copenhagen once, and I've never seen a more rush of bicycles. It was just like you find with cars. You had the morning rush and you have the afternoon rush, but in Copenhagen it was just bicycles. It was crazy. Of course there was cars as well, but yeah, I never seen that many cyclists in one spot before. And it does make sense that countries like Denmark and the Netherlands are quite focusing on cycling infrastructure, because it is a very flat country, and both of them are extremely flat. And you do see that other countries as well are trying to sort of incorporate more and more cycling infrastructure. In the UK, for example, especially with London, they're at least trying to work on some cycling infrastructure. And they are trying to do that in Norway, Sweden and Finland as well. The only thing that sort of stops it from being as successful as it is in Denmark and as it is in the Netherlands is the geography. It's not flat in Norway, for example. It's not flat in Nordvik. So cycling isn't gonna be that good of an option. Now, I do live in Norway, and I have seen a huge influx in electric bicycles, which they work as the same as regular bicycles, but for example, when you are cycling uphill, the electric engine, if you might call it that, sort of kicks in and makes it a little bit more easier cycling steep inclines. It doesn't do everything for you, but you have to pitch in a little bit yourself. But that is sort of one of the aspects that sort of helps out a little bit to compensate for the geography that makes cycling not as good as an option as in other countries. Alright, so we are now almost at the end. This is the last thing that we're going to be working on in this episode. It's been a long one. Hopefully it has been a good quality over this entire hour that we are now exceeding. But the last thing we're going to work on is the train station here in Nordvik. So it's going to be the main station, the central station here in this small town, or small city. I should start calling it a city. Now, I did have a lot of difficulties finding something that could fit this area, because yeah, there is a lot of train assets on the workshop. Most of them are either American, or a lot of them are also taken from different kinds of countries and different kinds of parts of Asia. And those who are European, and also quite typical European, they're often quite huge because they are from European countries where train infrastructure is maybe a little bigger than it is in these parts of Scandinavia. So quite often I was looking at train assets on the workshop and found something that might look kind of good and could fit, but then I realized that this building is elevated, or it's got way too many tracks to make sense at all, and I just couldn't find someone that did fit. And I also wanted the station to be an end station, which isn't very common on the workshop apparently, so I did struggle a lot by finding something that could fit. I did, however, find this one. This is this is made by Beard Monkey, and it is, I think it's a replica of the one in Malmö in Sweden, and I think it was first featured in a series by Taser many years ago. Now, it wasn't perfect, but it was an end station, which I wanted, but it had too many tracks in my opinion. This is it's not gonna be a lot of trains in this area. Usually when you go further north in both Norway, Sweden and Finland. You don't have that many different tracks even, and on these tracks there's not that much train traffic either. But I did decide just to go with it and try and see what happened. So what I did is, this building comes with a lot of different kinds of other buildings as well. So I took one of the other buildings and I turned it into PO, made it larger, and then actually just covered up half of the tracks. So now instead of having 4 tracks, we had 2 that were visible. And I think 2 tracks is more than realistic for the purposes that I was going for. So with this building covering the part of the train station with the tracks, you could sort of try to come up with what could be inside of it. There might be offices that could be a thing, because this is quite a huge train station, considering that it only has 2 tracks and it is in a city that isn't too big. But it's sort of what I had, and it's sort of the best that I could do with what I had. But you could imagine that there would be other stuff in the train station. Could be offices that I just mentioned, could be commercial buildings, could be like restaurants, shops of different kinds of types, could even be schools as well, some sort of private school or whatever. But I did I got pretty happy with how it turned out once I started detailing a little bit around the area. And definitely the next episode I am continuing working on this area around the train station, and it sort of made everything click, it sort of made everything work, if you know what I mean. And now I'm once again working on some letters. There's actually 3 different kinds of letters I've been working on in this episode alone. And these ones I think are what you might call Hollywood sign letters. I think they are made to look like it. And I did choose to go with 3 different kinds of letters just because I wanted something. I didn't want all of the more iconic signs to look pretty much the same. So that's why I went with different kinds of design. But what I'm spelling out here is Nordvik S. So yeah, that's Nordvik and just the letter S. Now the S stands for Central Station. Well, of course, Central Station is of course spelled with a C. However, in Norway, in Norwegian, and also Swedish, and also Danish, I think. I'm not completely sure in Finnish, but definitely in the types of Germanic languages that are Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish, Central is written with an S, and then the S at different kinds of stations stands for Central Station. And once I was finished with that, I started working on this hotel on the other side of the road from the train station. Now, this was probably going to be more of the historical hotels. This is probably a quite old one, maybe just as old as the train station itself. It is called, I think it's called the Grand Hotel, and it actually is from, I think it's Tampere in Finland. Don't quote me on that, but I'm 100% sure it is in Finland. Where in Finland, I'm not quite sure. But once again, it's an incredible asset, and I just needed to have it in Nordvik as well, to be a part of the more historical buildings in the city. And it would be probably a very nice hotel for the rich people that used to come visit Nordvik when the you know, when the train station here, and when train travel in general was probably for the more wealthier, for that small period that it sort of was for the wealthier. But I still believe that this hotel is sort of a little bit meant for the not really the upper class, but it is quite expensive still here to book a hotel, because it is so iconic and so historical for not only this city but also the entire region. And doing some detailing at the end here with a custom parking lot, and also added this huge hedge in order to try to hide the roads and the more urban areas outside of the hotel. Try to hide it a little bit to make this look a little bit nicer. But yeah, guys, that's it for this episode. I really enjoyed working on this one. It was a lot of fun. It took me a long time to work on this, all of this. So a like would be extremely appreciated. And if you sat and watched everything, once again, I think you have to. I think you have to give a like on this one. If you want to see more, then you know what to do. You should probably subscribe in order to catch the next episodes of Nordvik. Also remember to leave your questions down below. I want to do more Q&As in the future, so definitely if you have something that you would like to ask, this is the time to do so. But I'm gonna leave you now with some nice cinematics. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you again for the next episode of Nordvik, episode 5. Thank you all for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye for now.
We'll exercise judgment right now.
Because we have...
In the name of Jesus.
Oh, thank you.